Matthew, your host here, joined by my co-host Alec Harris from Halo Privacy, HavenX in the US. What's going on, Alec? Happy Friday.
What's up, man? How are you?
Good to have you here. Very good to have our special guest here as well, Michael Adams, on the show. Michael is former lead editor of investing and deputy editor of cryptocurrency for Forbes Advisor. And I'm very happy to have you on today. Michael, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So, election year, we have all the memes about Bitcoin and Trump and Orange Man, Orange Coin. Should we just get right into it? What do you think? Is Bitcoin going to soar, or is it going to be outlawed come 2025?
Oh, I honestly, I don't know. I don't know about soaring or being outlawed. I seriously doubt at this point in time that Bitcoin would be outlawed, personally.
Yeah.
I think, particularly with the insider money for moving into the ETFs, I think Bitcoin has a lot of legs in that regard. Whether or not it will still be the haven that many people thought it was and hope it will be is a question, I think, to ask. But I don't think Bitcoin's going anywhere now that spot Bitcoin ETFs have opened up this year. I simply think that's, if you want to know what's happening in finance and who's going to win in finance, as kind of the GameStop and meme stock stuff proved, you can look at where say iShares or somebody like that is putting their money. So I think Bitcoin is here to stay, and then as well with Ethereum ETFs Ethereum spot ETFs opening up probably soon as well. I think crypto's in really good shape right now. Even though the actual numbers aren't looking great this week, but as we all know, crypto is up and down all the time. Hodl, right? I mean, that's the theory.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and so what do you make of, so you've covered finance outside of crypto, and then crypto from that finance lens, and obviously the financialization of crypto assets has been a trend, right? And with the Bitcoin ETF, there was a significant moment for that initiative. But do you have an opinion on how TradFi, that side of the camp, views crypto? What's their interest in it? Is it purely just an asset for alpha, or is there more of a genuine interest in the tech?
I think individuals differ probably in that regard, would be my guess. I think that much of TradFi has now seen it as a viable way to make money, and obviously, if there's any way to make money, they want to do it. At the same token, I'm sure there are people within that world who believe strongly in blockchain technology, and crypto is obviously an important part of blockchain technology. But I would assume that not everybody is sold on that technology or on crypto as a philosophy either. In most of my research, I was talking with people more or less on the crypto side of things when I was writing articles about crypto. When I was not writing articles about crypto, I was not talking as much about crypto, although I will say that when I was covering crypto pretty heavily about 2 years ago, most people in the traditional finance sector still did not think it had legs, and thought it was a very speculative, volatile investment to take a chance on. But that may have changed in the past couple of years. And as I said earlier, especially with the introduction of spot ETFs in Bitcoin and Ethereum, that changes things considerably. Also opening up the possibility of ETFs for other coins. I've heard talk about Solana and Cardano as well. So yeah, but obviously, the thing that got me interested in crypto to begin with was not its traditional finance possibilities, was the alternative aspects of crypto. And I think that's what many people in the crypto sphere believe in. And so I kind of wonder if if it will remain as interesting to people as it has been, as it becomes more and more of a traditional investment asset.
Yeah, and actually, we jumped right into it, but maybe to back up a little bit. So you have not come from crypto per se, right? And you've been a writer, editor, right, on the journalism side of this, and was just a period of your career. So, do you want to kind of talk about the lead up and then how you got thrust into doing this finance editing work and writing about a space that I don't? Did you seek that out? Like, how did that happen?
No, actually, crypto is what led me into journalism to begin with. I was actually a marketing copywriter, and I was working for financial newsletters at the time, writing long form marketing copy. And it was around 2020, 2021, and the first crypto, one of the earlier crypto booms was kind of happening. And I was writing a bunch of marketing pieces about different coins and learned a ton about crypto. Just trying to sell financial newsletters, not trying to give people actionable information on it. And I started trying to expand my freelance business at the time into more journalistic ideas because I was very interested in doing journalism. And with my background in crypto, I was one of the few people at the time who could legitimately write about crypto, who also was not trying to just sell crypto, right? Like I had a very measured approach to it, which I think people appreciated. And I started off doing some freelance stories on cryptocurrency and was able to move in as deputy editor of crypto for Forbes Advisor, and then moved into the lead editor position a year or two after that. So that's kind of how I got into crypto. I was never really a true believer in crypto. I was fascinated by the technology and fascinated by the people I was meeting the more I covered it, and how strongly people believed in crypto and the future they were building was amazing to me as well. And I'd always been interested in the technology ever since I first heard about Bitcoin, probably in like 2012, something like that was when I first started really hearing about Bitcoin. And I was always interested in the technology, spent a lot of time looking up how it worked, how blockchain worked, how the proofs worked, stuff like that. Obviously it's all beyond me, but I had a vague understanding of how things worked. So when I started writing marketing copy about crypto, I could summon up what was needed to make it make sense for people.
Yeah. Do you see, the name of this show is Crypto Voices, and I've had the show for about 7 years now. So it was at the time calling it, and mostly has always been focused on Bitcoin, in fact. But at the time, crypto wasn't necessarily a bad word. Now it's a bad word in the Bitcoin community. It's sort of a Bitcoin only type ethos, obviously in the Bitcoin community. So crypto is a little bit shunned. But what do you feel sort of the mainstream understanding is of, blockchain technology, Bitcoin tech, the sound money that Bitcoin brings? Do you think that people are starting to understand that, or do they just look at crypto as like an asset class, like bonds or stocks?
You mean outside of the Bitcoin or crypto community?
Yes, outside.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, I think it goes back and forth. I think that I definitely know some people who are kind of average investors who look at Bitcoin and crypto as just another asset class. I know I've spoken with a number of people as well who look at it all as kind of the Wild West, especially after the FTX debacle from a couple years ago. That is still forefront in people's minds. Anytime I mention crypto, that's the first thing that people usually say to me is, "Well, FTX, what do you think about that?" And I'm kind of like, "Well, that's kind of old news at this point in time. It's all happened and it's all taken care of, and we're moving on from that."
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of skepticism about crypto. I think the biggest problem Bitcoin and crypto have in the mass adoption phase is people's inability to understand the technology. There's the old saying, I can't remember which famous investor it was. I think it was Benjamin Graham. I can't remember exactly who it was, but he said, when he was investing in a stock, he wanted to be able to draw the business model on a napkin with a crayon, And obviously, the business model of crypto can be drawn on a napkin with a crayon, just as simply as anything else can. But the technology of crypto is just well beyond what most people are thinking of. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between blockchain and crypto. They don't understand the difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
It's a complex world that people in the know really can comprehend. Although I've also spoken with a lot of people who should be in the know and simply aren't. People who are investing money in different cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, who know nothing about what they're investing money in. They just heard that it's something that can make them money, and they hope to make a lot of money really fast. And
I mean, that's a lot of people.
yeah, and
But
that's a lot of people in the stock market as well. In all fairness, I mean, not everybody knows what Nvidia is doing or how Nvidia makes money, but they're still investing in it, hoping that it'll make them a ton of cash.
Yeah.
So that's not unheard of.
we have self-inflicted wounds in the space where there's this ethos that somehow you have to be really savvy about how crypto works to be like a member of the community. And no other asset class is like that. And NVIDIA is a good example, right? Like Jensen is not out there saying like you can't invest in my stock unless you know everything about semiconductors and AI and TSCM and foundries and but like in Bitcoin, it's like, oh, that guy doesn't know enough about how UTXOs work, so he's not one of us, right? Like, and I don't understand the dogmatism. Matthew and I have talked about this for years. But as you were looking at it, right, like I'm sure you must have encountered some of that brand of the crypto community that was just encircling, putting these moats around us as if like only the worthy can enter.
Sure. I mean, the way I look at that though is simply that, I mean, when I first started covering crypto and talking with people, I mean, Bitcoin was looked at as the future. I mean, this is, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything that's news to you all, but I mean, Bitcoin was a different world. I mean, it's a world that we're building that is separate from the traditional finance world, that is separate from the traditional world of companies, of currency, of everything. And so I understand a bit of that gatekeeping in that world, that it is sort of a special place to be in some ways, and and a true believer would believe that they're ushering in the future of everything, of how society is going to work, because obviously finance is an important part of any culture or society, always has been, always will be. And if you're talking about changing the way that finance is done, um, you're talking about something very revolutionary, which was one of the things that attracted me to covering Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as well, was the revolutionary aspect of it, for better or for worse.
Yeah, and so uh, do you think it's deservedly a revolutionary technology?
I think that's I think that's an interesting question. I think that the world I've heard people wanting to build out of blockchain, DAOs, cryptocurrency sounds very revolutionary, very, very different. The whole Web3 theory is obviously a fascinating world that people are talking about building. Um, at the same token, I mean, I remember I studied philosophy in college and graduate school, and I remember watching a lecture with Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky talking with each other. And Noam Chomsky puts out all these ideas about how you can build a different society on the ruins of the United States or something like that. And Michel Foucault basically just says, that's great, but it's going to be the same thing eventually. And I wonder if Bitcoin and crypto may fall prey to that same kind of revolutionary. I think the actual term from the philosopher Gilles Deleuze is revolutionary psychology, that everything just kind of keeps going until it becomes the same. That's actually not true. That's not revolutionary psychology. That's a totally different thing. But but
I love
everything.
that idea that you just laid out because that is exactly what is a accurate is an accurate criticism of the financialization of Bitcoin is this you take this asset that was, decentralized and immutable, right? And censorship proof, right? And then
Mhm.
slice and dice it into ETF shares and it's just another ticker. And there's some of
Exactly.
that going on for sure.
Exactly, and that's what's almost saddest to me about crypto. I mean, the stuff that got me first interested in cryptocurrency when I was writing marketing copy about it were actually the privacy coins, which are illegal in many countries. That was when they started making those illegal. I was like, oh, okay, so this is not going to be what I thought it was. Like I remember thinking at that point in time, I was like, yeah, of course I'd want to own privacy coins, like something that if something were to happen in a country that I lived in, I could take it anywhere and nobody could trace it. Right? Obviously, like most Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies don't really work that way. You know, um, they are not traceable per se, and I think that's why they are being embraced more and more by the financial establishment, is because they can be looked at as just another asset class.
But then, of course, with Bitcoin, the big X factor is you can withdraw it. The next question would be for how long. I can absolutely see a future where they try to monopolize the holdings of those coins in certain regulated institutions with certain regulated brokers. And then, you are indeed back to the same place where we started.
Sure. I mean, the more that traditional finance gets involved in it, as wonderful as Bitcoin, spot Bitcoin ETFs have been for the price of Bitcoin roughly throughout this year, at the same token, the more the traditional finance gets involved, the more it becomes a traditional asset class. And the more it becomes something like, like you were just saying that, like, you start withdrawing too much Bitcoin and, just like with GameStop, they just put a stop on trading it. Just can't do it anymore. And that was kind of, to me, like I said, I got very interested in the privacy notions of Bitcoin at first, not Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency and Bitcoin as well. And the more I started realizing that it's not really private. It's not really untraceable. Not that I'm really planning on doing anything that I need untraceable money for, but I'm also a realist, and there's something to be said about there's something to be said about cash as well, that like people can't, this is all just typical Bitcoin argument, right? That the beautiful thing about cash was that it all looked the same, right? So nobody knew where this dollar went or came unless they were tracking the serial number on it, and I do believe in kind of like, I do believe in freedom. I'm not necessarily a libertarian, but I believe in individual freedoms, and financial freedom is a big part of that. And obviously in our increasingly digitized world, that is just not the case. That outside of cryptocurrency, there is very little financial freedom, and even inside cryptocurrency, there is very little financial freedom. I mean, anything that has been anything that's been done to create financial freedom, such as Tornado Cash or something like that, is immediately deemed illegal and punished by the strictest extent of the law.
Have you followed the Tornado Cash and the Samurai cases at all?
Not anymore, because as I said, I moved away from the deputy editor of cryptocurrency position. I stopped covering cryptocurrency exclusively almost 6 months after I started covering it exclusively, mainly because the funding dried up from crypto, because FTX occurred, and my company was like, there are some other stories you need to cover besides cryptocurrency. Although I stayed pretty focused on it for a while, because I wanted to cover breaking news stories on it when they happened, because I was still deputy editor of cryptocurrency. But then when I moved into the lead editor position almost a year ago, I stopped paying as much attention to cryptocurrency. As just the day-to-day happenings of it, I stopped paying as much attention to.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be interesting. I haven't followed, day-to-day myself on those cases, but my understanding still is there's going to be questions about custody with both of those, because in Tornado Cash's case, custody was more or less evident from the developer side, and from Samurai's case, it is not evident.
Yeah, those cases I actually don't know as much about as I would like to, because I was very interested in the Tornado Cash case in particular when it first happened, because I was fascinated that somebody created a way to more or less make the transactions anonymous, and governments immediately said, well, actually you can't do that, and in fact we're going to prosecute you for even doing that, because you should have known you were laundering money just by what you did. Which is all, I mean that's kind of, there's so many points at which I think this is another thing that I love about crypto, is that there are so many points at which crypto and Bitcoin have just shown the kind of emperor has no clothes reality of our financial political systems here. That it's kind of like, well, why shouldn't you be able to do that? And the answer is, well, because the government can't track where the money is coming and going at that point in time, and they need to keep systems in place. That's why I have to say that, as I said, I think I said this more or less when we started, I can say it explicitly now, is that, although I don't see Bitcoin going anywhere, I don't know if I believe anymore in the promise that I thought Bitcoin possessed when I first started covering it a mere 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it certainly seems, they're certainly going to come for it. They're certainly financializing it, as we see. But it's always the big question in my mind is, the big financial centers, London, New York, uh, we know that China's pretty much locked it down. But, they're going to eventually roll out these CBDCs. They're already rolled out in some places, but to a very limited extent. And then can they transition it where basically people need to use the CBDC, but you cannot withdraw your Bitcoin? That would be basically, I think, the end game for it. And then whether people would comply with that. I mean, there still is a Bitcoin economy outside of any financial system, so that could survive. But it's it's interesting.
Yeah, and you mentioned CBDCs. That was another thing I covered early on with some stuff about CBDCs, and that was what started really terrifying me with regard to blockchain and crypto technology. That as much as I believed in, even as I said, even though I wasn't like a rabid believer, but I really believed in the future that blockchain could bring. And the more I started reading about CBDCs, I was like, this is actually quite terrifying, because this could actually lock down currency more than it was ever locked down before. And I hope that those are simply ruled out. I hope that those do not come to fruition whatsoever.
Even if you could craft a sophisticated and thoughtful approach to CBDCs, I still think there's no way it works out in the long run, because it's too much power to be in one place over a long period of time. So you could start the best CBDC project that any nation has ever construed, and it still wouldn't work. And we've already seen CBDC discussions go from whatever their intended starting place was immediately to financial censorship. It almost is like the first step is where it goes. And I love that you brought up the privacy coins, because that's a very near and dear part of the crypto ecosystem to me. And I think, in the US under the law, it's innocent until proven guilty. In financial regulation, it's prove to me you're not doing something illegal or you can't use it, right? And we see that in traditional banking, right? That's to get a bank account and transact in it, you have to prove that somehow everything you're buying is, sugar, milk, and eggs. And so in my opinion, like privacy coins and specifically Monero, I genuinely do not care what the price of it is, because there's value to me in having that censorship resistant product.
I agree. I agree with you about that. I mean, honestly, to me, like the promise of crypto was the privacy coin, and privacy. I mean, the fact I am surprised they are still legal in the United States. Honestly,
Barely.
Barely, but they are. You're not you're not prosecuted for owning them in any way, shape, or form at this point in time. Unlike in other countries where I believe they are just flat out, you cannot trade them, you cannot own them.
Yeah, I don't know what it is country by country, but it's certainly deplatformed in the sense that exchanges rarely, and certainly the major exchanges are averse to touching them, and makes it harder. It almost forces a gray market economy to even get them. And then vendors are disincentivized from accepting it. And so really it becomes a peer-to-peer economy, which is where it started. That's not a bad thing, but it doesn't bring a promise out to the masses.
No, and it also leaves. I mean, I think it does leave the question. Oftentimes when I tell people that like privacy coins are what I was first really interested in with cryptocurrency, they're often like, well, but what nefarious aspects are you involved in that makes you think you need those privacy coins? And my point is always just that nothing nefarious. I just don't think anybody needs to know what I'm doing with my money all the time. And I'd like, and if, I mean, the other thing that really spoke to me about cryptocurrency was when I was interviewing folks from Argentina about what their relationship with crypto was, and realizing that in a failed economy, a stable coin and Bitcoin becomes extremely valuable. Because I believe it was in Argentina where they outlawed the trading of US dollars. So you could not exchange your Argentinian money for US dollars, but you could use Bitcoin to trade for a stable coin, which would then be equivalent to US dollars.
And they just had a parallel black market that was 2 or 3 times the official rate.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I mean that's when I started seeing once again that there is real value to crypto, to people if you're living in an economy that does not have the current stability that the U.S. economy does. And I'm also under no delusions that the U.S. economy will always be this stable. I mean, as a friend of mine once said as well, though, I mean, he was like, when I was talking with somebody about covering Bitcoin, and they were like, look, like the reality is that Bitcoin doesn't have a navy enforcing its value, which the U.S. dollar does have. And, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. dollar will always remain stable either. I mean, someday somebody's going to challenge that navy, and the U.S. dollar will not be worth what it is worth today.
Do you think that there's always going to be a role then for something that's gray market? Because there's a little bit of a mixture, like when you talk about with Argentina, their stable coin's really not private, but like you said before, it's important to not have spying eyes know exactly what you're doing with your money. So you have sort of this gray market trying to avoid what, your transactions from the prying eye of Big Brother. And then you also have this other, let's just call it Bitcoin. You don't have to worry about Ethereum and stuff at this point, but you have Bitcoin, which is not private. There are ways to make it private, like what Samurai was doing. That has now been attacked, and that is now in sort of regression, at least for maybe, let's say, the average person. So, and in that way, you have Wall Street joining in, broker dealers, all the rest. Coinbase is the anointed one for sure. Like, they've joined the Wall Street Club. So you have Bitcoin, that's like this asset, and then you have privacy coins, which, as Alex said, pretty much gray market. Is there any scenario where you could see that either of those two could grow? And then are there scenarios where you think that, like, they're just not? It sounds like you're more pessimistic, so that's why I'm asking you about scenarios for growth.
I'll just be honest. I am kind of a pessimist just at heart. It's just that simple. I am very pessimistic in general. So don't take what I'm saying as like the truth necessarily, or the future. I tend to see bad things happening, and that's just how I am. It's how my personal life is lived. It's how everything is lived for me. As far as a more positive viewpoint, I mean, I do think. I mean, there will always be gray markets of some kind in the world, whether it's a privacy coin, diamonds, something where people are trading something that cannot be traced. I don't necessarily think that that Bitcoin is going to head back in that direction. I don't know what's going to happen with privacy coins, just because. I mean, from my own beliefs, I see the value of them. If I look at it from a governmental perspective, I see why they are dangerous and detrimental to an existing power structure. And so, as I mentioned before, I mean, my background is in philosophy, so a lot of what I see in the world is power structures, how power structures are asserting themselves and kind of ensuring their longevity. So I guess just from my own pessimistic worldview, I don't see much future of a kind of free Bitcoin continuing, and I don't see I don't see privacy coins as being a necessarily usable way of transferring wealth in the long term. So yeah, I don't mean to be so pessimistic. I wish I could be more positive. I would love to say something more positive. That's just not how my mind works.
That's all right. Try living next to Russia. I understand the pessimism.
So I have a maybe unrelated question, but as you're looking at power structures, one of the things that Trump has come out and said or advocated for as he's courted the crypto community for his campaign is, and this is very on brand for him, but just like making Bitcoin an American technology, and like America needs to win Bitcoin and mining, and in many senses that's a really good sentiment, because maybe there's the creating a clear and open regulatory environment that would be great. But also, should Bitcoin be like associated with any country? Does a certain country need to win Bitcoin? Or is that even a thing, right? Like, is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting take on it, because I mean, obviously, in the ideal sense, nobody should win Bitcoin, right? I mean, Bitcoin should be Bitcoin. It should be a decentralized, autonomous currency, you know, currency, right? Because it can't technically even be a currency, right? Because that's illegal to do in almost any nation. You can't create currencies without the approval of the federal government as well. So,
Money, say money, cash.
money, yeah, something. I mean, I don't, but anyway, the in the reality of the world, though, which is one thing that I think Trump is very very perceptive about. Somebody is going to win Bitcoin, and it is going to be associated with some country, given the way our world works currently. And yes, I think the United States should be that country. That was the first thing that drew me to the idea of CBDCs. Was that I thought before I knew much about them, I thought, well, somebody needs to win the blockchain battle. Somebody's going to, and maybe a CBDC is the way to do it. And then the more I started learning about CBDCs, the more I was like, that is not the way to do it whatsoever. Um, but maybe if you could make super friendly Bitcoin regulations, maybe there would be a way to keep some of that Bitcoin wealth in the borders of the United States, which is the goal of the government, um, and the financial system, more or less here. And I see the value in that. Although I also see once again that that is not at all what Bitcoin was designed to do or be.
Cash is, I track cash and some of these other things. Actually, I've surveyed the top 50 currencies in the world. It's about $9 trillion equivalent, just cash. Nothing fancy, not counting bank reserves at the central bank or anything, just cash. And it is actually growing. It's been slow a little bit with the higher interest rates, been printing a little bit less, but overall, it still grows at a decent clip. And it hasn't matched the rhetoric of we're going cashless, we're going digital. And it's not a huge number. It's not, like the $100 trillion GDP that the world has, but, and Bitcoin already is $1 trillion market cap. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that I think has to persist for some time, certainly with the developing world. I'm not. It kind of sounds like talking consolation prizes now because it's not. It's not such a huge pool of money theoretically, but
Mm-hmm.
compared to like asset value, right? Because asset value can be tens of trillions or hundreds of trillions of dollars. So, yeah, I mean, there is that. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. It's not really a question, but if you had any,
No, I mean, cash is. I don't think cash will. I think it would be hard for cash to entirely disappear, um, without something seriously changing, um, within nation states. But obviously, I mean, the push for CBDCs was more or less for that to happen.
taking a moment to remind you that this show is brought to you by Trezor, home of the original Bitcoin hardware wallet. For over 10 years now, Trezor means business in Bitcoin security and functionality. When using their wallet software Trezor Suite to connect to the Bitcoin network, you're automatically connected via Tor, protecting your identity and giving you full control of your coins in a fully open source manner, both on the software level and on the hardware level. So head on over to Trezor.io to grab your brand new Trezor Safe 5 with a secure element, as well as a ton of available accessories to back up your keys and keep your coins safe.
So I want to shift over to, and I think, Michael, you said this is the first article you wrote on crypto, but looking into Satoshi and the legend and the identity. And I think it's hard to be in the space without having at least a curiosity about that. It's a fascinating story, this anonymous Genesis story that has yet to be unmasked, and who knows, maybe it really almost feels like being there at the formation of a religion, and you could see how 300 years later, what is just an empirical set of facts and circumstances becomes mythology. Like you could totally see that, and it almost has that characterization now. And so I just would love you to unpack like your experience looking at that story.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, first off, just what you were saying about mythologizing of Satoshi is very true. I mean, I feel like when I first discovered that story, I really just felt like it was honestly just like a sci-fi movie. Like this anonymous person creates this new form of currency that's super technologically advanced, and people start buying into it. I think the honestly, I don't think anybody's ever going to find out who Satoshi Nakamoto is or was, if Satoshi is still alive. I don't know. I mean, uh, obviously there's what's his name, Craig Wright, who claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto, which very well may be the case. I don't know.
Well, courts
And
courts in the UK have said no recently. So
right, and I know that, but I just feel like there, people do make claims that they are Satoshi, and they could be right. I mean, we don't know. I mean, the another interesting case that I've heard is that from Sahil Gupta's Medium posts about Elon Musk being Satoshi Nakamoto. I know that Sahil did some research into that and really has very very real reasons he thinks that. Although I know Elon has denied that and seems unlikely to me as well. I mean, that's like the theory that Francis Bacon is William Shakespeare, right? Just because you're two famous people doing something at a similar time does not mean you are the same person. And I honestly, my belief on it is that I think that Satoshi Nakamoto believed that whoever that person or people was or were or is, believed they were creating an alternative currency for the world to use, which is a highly illegal thing to do in any nation. And I believe they were afraid they might be prosecuted for it, and therefore were anonymous and are now multi billionaires. And it would be horrible to suddenly find out that your next door neighbor. I mean, that would completely disrupt your life. Um, I'm honestly not sure that Satoshi Nakamoto is still on the earth either. I've heard some theories about that as well. But I haven't looked into that story in a while, so I know things have changed since the last time I looked at it. Um, but those are my reasons that I think that Satoshi was and is anonymous, and I don't think. I think that whoever it was did a great job of covering their tracks to the best of their ability, and if we haven't deduced who it is yet, we may not.
Do you think that there are some people that do know?
I mean, it's funny because my initial thought was to say no, I don't think so. But I also think back to when I used to talk about conspiracies in the aughts, and everybody was talking about various conspiracy theories in the world, and I was kind of like, I mean, I've lived in this world long enough to know that like people find things out. Like it's hard to keep anything completely secret. People learn things. You slip up and say something. You do something like there may be people who know who Satoshi is, um, but I think it's kind of surprising. It would kind of surprise me if people did know, though, because I do think I have a hard time imagining that. Again, when I used to say about conspiracies was that the problem with the conspiracy was that somebody would leak the truth somewhere, and obviously, like people say, the truth has been leaked at points in time on YouTube or things like that in various conspiracies, not necessarily with Satoshi, but in other conspiracies, and and I feel like if somebody else knows, somebody else is going to talk, and that word is kind of going to spread. And I know there are rumors, but none of them are substantiated enough to make it seem like anybody really hasn't any idea who Satoshi is.
So, yeah, I tend to take the other side of this, which is that community of cypherpunks and the people. This is fairly niche stuff, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the collection of skill sets required and reflected in the white paper and harnessed effectively in launching Bitcoin. I don't think there's a huge community of people for whom that could have been. And I would think that community probably knows itself well enough. And it's almost like, we can think of other communities where you just by process of a deduction, a bunch of people have said, well, we know it's not any of those people. And so only a couple people are left standing in that small little niche, right?
Right.
My guess is there's a small cohort that either knows or has a really good idea of who it must have been. But because of the ethos of that cypherpunk community, it would just be such a violation of the trust in that world and the predicate, privacy that underpins that grouping, that they would just never share it, which is incredible, right? Because the secrets always get out. And then you couple that with all of the advanced investigative capabilities that are out there. And for
Mm-hmm.
someone to have done their digital setup without leaving a breadcrumb and been able to not somehow leak their identity interpersonally, it's amazing. I agree with you. But I guess I mean, it's obviously possible because that's what's happened.
No, I do think you're right. That is something to be said, that the cypherpunk community very well may choose to keep it a secret. That would be, if there's one community in the world that could actually keep that secret, if they had because of their ethos, because of their philosophies, if they had real inklings of who this person might be, they may not really say anything. If they had like real knowledge of who it was. I think that
or
is
even
possible.
or even misdirect. Not to throw
Right.
it too much out, but never know.
Right. That's true. That's true. That's true. But in the end, I also, I mean, as fascinating as the story is, and as much as it reads like I said, I mean, if you told me this story when I was a kid, I'd be like, that is a great sci-fi story. Like, how did you come up with that idea? Um, like, I honestly, I don't. And obviously, at this point in time, it doesn't matter anymore who Satoshi is.
Yep.
I mean, that's just a question of like satisfying our own interests. Um, I think what Satoshi created is the real value, obviously.
Well, and at this point, it's like never meet your heroes. No matter who, if it was revealed, no matter who it was, it would be disappointing
Yeah.
because it would be
It
a
would be
flawed
disappointing,
human.
and somebody probably wouldn't believe it. You know,
Well,
I
there is a
think,
way to prove it, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
that much we know. But yeah, I think it's better left as a myth, and the fact that it's been so successfully masked this long is a good indication that that might be the case. However, one thing that I wonder about is assuming Satoshi's still alive, let's say that's a
Mhm.
possibility. At some point, that person will reach the end of their natural life. And we don't know what their intention is for all the Bitcoin under Satoshi's control right now. If it's not all lost and the person didn't die before they could do something about it, is there a move at that death that maybe still keeps the person anonymous but allocates that many billions or however much it ends up being worth of Bitcoin into something? And that's an inflection point that I still think is potentially in front of us.
That's true. That is very true. If Satoshi is still with us, that is definitely a possibility. Although I wonder, because the Bitcoin has not moved in so long, if it ever will. I mean, that's amazing in its own right, that somebody is worth this much money if they are still here and is choosing not to exercise any of that wealth.
Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even entirely impossible that Satoshi could be a trillionaire in their lifetime. If
Oh, exactly.
that's
Exactly.
entirely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that part is an incredible. If Satoshi's alive, it's a reflection of a certain principled belief in the point and of Bitcoin as opposed to the monetization of it at the kind of like most authentic level.
Which is all fascinating as well, right? And adds to the mythos and the mythology of this person or persons, is that it's somebody purely, apparently seems to be somebody purely driven by principle and what they believe is the way to approach this tremendous store of wealth as a philosophy rather than a practical matter, which to me is admirable.
Only 19 trillion to go for that. 5%. Satoshi has 5%. So, yeah, absolutely could happen in this.
Yeah.
I think in one or two halvings. Yeah. I don't know how much you're into the price analysis or anything, but there's some interesting, there's some interesting projections that are going out there that, it's possible that we could, we could hit 10 trillion in, a couple years. And then after the next halving, get to 20 trillion. But, uh, you know, that's again, that's, it's still a more interesting, I think, question, which we started with, is if it's, how far are they going to take it to to really try to lock it down. They could like say, okay, you can own it, you can have it's an asset, you can have some of it, but I even think even in that argument, it doesn't go so far. It's like what then if not the ability to withdraw? What then is Bitcoin? It's not once you centralize it, once you outlaw it, there's not any value in it anymore.
I agree, and I mean, again, I don't mean to be a pessimist, but it's my view that we are moving more and more in that direction rather than in the direction that I believe that somebody like Satoshi would have wanted Bitcoin to go in. And certainly the people that I was talking to and the early adopters of Bitcoin wanted it to move in.
Well, as a pessimist, as quick aside from our typical show topics, how do you feel about AI? Is that also going to take us in a bad direction?
Oh, I'm not. Thus far, I'm not as pessimistic about AI because I don't necessarily believe that we've seen real AI yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I feel like lots of people are going to be put out of jobs, particularly people who do what I do, will be put out of jobs, which isn't good for my community. But I don't. I think that the real goal is to learn to adapt with what we are calling AI, generative AI, um, to learn the technology. I remember when I was in my 20s and I was trying to write poetry a lot, and I remember I was writing everything out by hand, and I eventually realized that the way I learned how to write was writing emails. So like, why am I writing everything out by hand? Because I have this outdated notion that poetry is supposed to be written by hand. Like I needed to be able to cut and paste and move things around the way that you move things around on a computer for me to write.
Mm.
Um, and I think that at some point in time, many aspects of what we're calling AI will be the same way. That it's just integrated into what we do. The things that terrify me are the visual stuff with AI, movies, photographs, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I worry for my kids in that world, but I feel like it'll be the world that they grow up in, and they will know how to navigate it better than I ever will. I will be like my grandparents, will just be like, "Oh my God, AI is terrifying, and I don't know what to do with this." But people who grow up natives of that world will better understand how to navigate a world of completely falsified images, and falsified false movies of people doing things that weren't there, that never did it. That's the stuff that scares me more about AI, is what it's going to do to our almost to our digital understanding of the world more than our real understanding of the world. That it's going to make the digital world completely. I think that it could, and maybe in some ways already has, make the digital world completely untrustable.
Potentially. I
Yeah,
think that is one manifestation of that technology. I don't think it's inevitable, but uh, or it could be a phase of it too.
could be a
That
phase. That's why I say that.
yeah.
Like, I think of my kids, and I'm kind of like, they'll grow up in this. They'll understand how to work through that. I will probably always be somewhat scared of it because it's a new technology. I'm older. I don't understand everything about it. As you said, and again, I was being pessimistic there. And there's obviously a lot of value that will come out of it as well. Just like any technology, there'll be scary things and values that come out of it.
Well, I just had the experience recently of explaining to my oldest son, who's still very young, what a rotary phone was. Um, and it was like I had to kind of like unpack I was like, throw away everything you know about phones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like he just has experienced FaceTime, right? That's what he knows.
Mm-hmm.
And so listen, like we're all probably about the same age, and so I'm upset that you called yourself old. But the if we think that technology has advanced quickly in our lifetimes, our children will experience that in an order of magnitude that has never been seen before. And that's exciting and scary. And I think to bring it back to crypto a little bit, something that is immutable, just something, right, is really important. Because you're right, like I'm kind of untrusting of a lot of things by nature, and especially in the digital world. And at my day job, we do a lot of investigations as well. So I've just seen a lot of fake stuff. And I've seen very intelligent people fall for fake stuff before, for sure. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen to me either. But a lot of us as humans are inherently trusting. Many of us, I'm that way. Um, and I worry a little bit that we'll like outsmart ourselves with our own technology and lose a little bit of what. And I'm getting because you brought up your philosophy background, and I've heard you talk about topics like that before. Is there a loss of humanity that comes from these tech, and not just crypto, but like advanced technologies that we so rush to adopt?
I mean, when I was in my 20s, I would have said yes. That I really believed that like the world we were entering was losing a lot of value and beauty and stuff like that. But at this point in time, after living with advanced technologies for quite some time, I don't think so whatsoever. I think that humanity is humanity. We just work in different media at different points in time. Um, I mean, we change ever so slightly and evolve or whatever, intellectually and conceptually, but I don't think I mean, like I think about music, right? Like, I mean, many of my favorite artists at this point in time are all electronic composers, right? I mean, it's not like moving from. I personally don't believe that moving from Beethoven to Aphex Twin has in any way, shape, or form reduced the amount of knowledge, insight, or beauty that music has. It's just different tools that somebody uses for it and to create it. And I honestly think as well, I say about the scary things that AI could bring visually, but it can also do all sorts of amazingly wonderful, beautiful things visually. That I'm sure there's all sorts of art forms that will evolve on the back of AI that I haven't even thought of that are very human and wonderful parts of it. I mean, I thought about when I first started hearing about AI writing tools, I was like, man, I really should write a sci-fi novel using AI. Like now, obviously, that's not a big deal. Tons of people are doing that. But I thought it'd be really cool to have this kind of like cyborg novel that was written between a human and a computer for a sci-fi story. Like I just thought that would be a cool way to do it. Obviously, like I said, Amazon is flooded with books written by AI at this point in time. So that's not quite the insight I thought it was. But those sorts of things are kind of cool.
Yeah. So maybe I'll vector us towards a wrap up question. And I actually really love it when we get off topic, because I think there's so many interesting people in our space, and they tend to be drawn to the space because they are interesting. I think I
Mm-hmm.
find that to be true over and over. And so my challenge to you would be, so as a declared pessimist, and I see lots of reasons why that is a totally rational worldview. But however, everything you just said was like very optimistic, and I agree with you about I like Beethoven and I like Aphex Twin too. And there is talent and creativity like oozing from both. Um, and so, the question would be, right, if it's possible that the kind of techno utopia future is one path for us, what are the biggest challenges to that? Right? Like what could undermine that?
Ooh, man, I almost don't want to say what I think are the biggest challenges because there are also things that I think are very important to humanity. I think the biggest challenge to a techno utopia is more or less the state system. You know, I think state systems with how the control they exert over finance, capital, and individuals is very difficult. Um, at the same token, as I said, I also think the state system is a very important thing to ensure that to ensure that people. I mean, so in my view, states came to be not states in the sense of the United States, but states as in nation states came to be as a way for people who had no power to organize against people who had power, namely the kings and queens. Um, and So I think that if you actually strip the state of all its power, you're stripping the weakest people of any of their power. But at the same token, states have. I once wanted, when I was still studying philosophy, I wanted to write a book called, I was going to call it Systems of Liberation, Systems of Control. The idea being that every philosophy starts as a system to liberate people and ends up as a system to control people.
Mm,
And
nice.
I think that I think that I think that's what we have. That's what you have to balance. And I think that what it really be is that the techno utopia could come to be for a period of time. We may have already passed that period, um, and um, and then there will be another iteration of something that offers hope and value to humanity. Um, and I don't know what that'll be. As I said before, about the AI world that my kids will grow up in, like that'll be their world. None of that'll be interesting to them. That'll just be the milieu they grew up in. What will be interesting to them is whatever's coming next. And I hope that they will build that future that is valuable and interesting. I think that, yeah, yeah, I think that's more or less what I think about that.
Listen, Michael, that's a very interesting way, I think, to end it. We've been dabbling a little bit in philosophy as well. We interviewed an atheist recently, talked about some of the craziness in. I mean, I say that like I've never spoken to an atheist before. That's not true, but he's a pretty well-known atheist, and very hardcore on certain biblical issues and whatnot, but also very much into philosophy as well. And I think there's a lot of philosophical things that need to come to the fore here because having a lot of fascist type thinking around the world is a bit scary, and philosophy hopefully can help us, and hopefully,
although there are also many famous fascist philosophers as well. So
yeah, have you read? What is it?
I've read Heidegger. Yes.
Yes. Yes. What the lead figure there.
Yeah.
So a recent philosopher gave a summary. It's Nietzsche and the Nazis by Stephen Hicks. You read that one?
I have not read that one. That sounds very interesting. Yeah.
But he drills down on all of them that the Nazis read, and indeed there were a lot of collectivist, fascist philosophers, and Nietzsche himself wasn't really that much of an individualist. So.
No, and I'd like to believe that philosophy is the antidote to fascism, but I don't believe that is the case. I believe the antidote to fascism is just humanity.
Anything else to say on that? We don't have to close it. This is interesting.
I guess I guess what I'd say is that having worked in marketing, I believe that any system can be justified. Any system can be justified post hoc, right? And that's what most of what we do, I think, is that we do what we feel, we act, and then we justify why we acted. And so, I think that's why I say humanity, because I think that at our core, all of us are human and have things in common and believe in certain things. And the goal is to lift up and justify those tendencies rather than the control-oriented, fearful, paranoiac tendencies.
Do you think that there's like an individualist streak in the West that sets us apart from some of the, going back to what we were talking about with the Nazis, like in particular, there were a lot of German collectivist philosophers, and that is indeed the path that they chose. Do you think that there are, I don't know, some breakaway principles for us here in the West that can save us in case we do go down that path? I mean, I personally, obviously I'm dancing around the issue. People think Donald Trump's going to like trample on the Constitution and whatnot. May or may not happen. I tend to think the United States is much stronger than what people like to believe. But, when you look at Xi, when you look at Putin, look at Viktor Orban, and you look at Trump, and you look at Kim Jong-un, you have these very stereotypical fascist dictators coming to power. And this exact same thing that happened 100 years ago in Europe. So I don't know. I would like to think that there's something uniquely American or something unique in the West that kept us out of these traps. But I don't know.
I honestly don't. I honestly don't think there is. And I also think that in some ways, I don't think people will like this. I don't like thinking it, but I think that whether or not you're under a fascist regime has more to do with how you look at things than anything else. That I think certain people could claim that that the West, meaning probably the United States and Great Britain, were in many ways as fascist as any other state through those whole periods. It just didn't affect the entire populace, and we happened to win, so we get to write how we did things.
There was a lot of censorship in Britain and in the U.S.
Yeah,
but we also didn't have some of the
And
very,
there
very
was
negative consequences of, the other regimes.
Yeah, but I mean, there have been negative consequences in under British rule and under American rule as well.
That's true.
It just didn't happen to affect my family, which I'm very grateful for. And for me to think that we're somehow immune from that, I don't think is true. I think that as I said before, I just think that the goal is always to amplify our humanity and our similarities rather than our differences.
So didn't the Supreme Court take up the adjudication of prior restraint during World War? It was World War One or World War Two?
That I don't know.
I think it was as a result, because that's why they allowed for certain caveats, and one of them was troop movements. And I think it was World War Two, but the case was brought because of government prior restraint actions. I forget what they were, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that. But here's a couple of cases that will caveat out, and one of them, importantly at the time, was troop movement, which they didn't want to be telegraphed out to the enemy. But it shows you very much what you just said. It was a reflection of the fascism of that time, but we had a mechanism in our system of government that addressed that differently than we've seen elsewhere, right? Which is important.
That is true, and I do also think I mean you bring up people's fears of Donald Trump, and I hope and I still believe that the U.S. is a robust system, and obviously I mean if you talk to people on the other side, they would say similar things about the Democratic Party as well, whether it was Obama or Biden, somehow executive overreach and stuff like that.
Sure. Drone attacks.
So I do think, and I hope and believe that the United States has a robust system that, although to not be as pessimistic as I was just before, but I think that although in instances the U.S. does not live up to its ideals, in the long run and for the vast majority, it does live up to those ideals.
Listen, it was a pleasure talking with you, Michael. Really enjoyed the conversation, and hope to speak with you again soon.
Thanks. It's great talking with you guys as well.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Good to see you, man.
Take care.
All right.